Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Vulcan Solar Project Scoping meeting. We'll be beginning in just a moment. We have a couple people still signing in. Hello again. I think it is about 3 minutes after, so let's go ahead and get started. This is the scoping meeting for the Vulcan Solar Project and the related resource management plan amendment. A couple reminders here. This meeting is being recorded, so it'll be available for others. If you need assistance, you can reach out to us. There's the Q&A over there. Microphones and cameras are disabled for this meeting, except for the presenters. There will be an opportunity for question and answers after the presentation, but we encourage you to type your questions or comments as you think of them through the presentation, and that would give some of our folks a chance to see them before we get to the Q&A. Commenting. The purpose of the scoping meeting is to solicit comments and inform you about the project. At a couple times during the slide, we'll share information with you on how you can submit your comments to be considered. We estimate the presentation will last about 35 minutes, after which we'll have the question and answer period. And then if needed, at 5 o'clock, if we have more people signing on that maybe came on late, we'll repeat the same presentation and offer a second Q&A period if the need arises. Introductions for your presenters today. Tyler Lindsay is the field manager of the Lower Sonoran Field Office. And Tyler, would you like to introduce folks?
Hey, Dave. Thanks, everybody. Tyler Lindsay, Lower Sonoran Field Manager. What I'd like to share is that we do have a group of subject matter experts behind the scenes to help answer some of those Q&A that come in during the presentation today. So we're really looking forward to the questions that come in, and more importantly, those submitted comments online to really help us analyze the project. So thank you all for being here.
Back up here. Also presenting will be Derek Eisenbach. He's the Renewable Energy Project Manager for the Arizona State Office, and I'm David Cox. I'm a contractor working on behalf of PLM to help prepare the National Environmental Policy Act, EIS.
All right, I'll take this one over, Dave. So the purpose of today's meeting is to provide an overview of the Vulcan Solar Project and Resource Management Plan Amendment, and also provide an overview of the National Environmental Policy Act, and as we mentioned, how to submit public comments. We want to also provide an opportunity to answer questions, as was mentioned, and help you all understand and formulate a substantive comment for developing the EIS. And just to reiterate, the cameras and mics are turned off, but please, as we are presenting today, go ahead and submit those questions so that our team has the time to provide an answer throughout today's scoping meeting. And with that, I would like to hand it over to Derek Eisenbach to present on the National Environmental Policy Act. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Tyler. Let me bring up my camera here. All right, here we go. Yes, so we are in the scoping meeting for the Vulcan Solar Environmental Impact Statement, and this is being prepared in conformance with the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. So NEPA is our federal law. It's been called kind of the Magna Carta of environmental laws. This structures all federal decision making with respect to environmental impacts. So it's been around since 1969. For those of you that really want a kind of nerdy background on it, and what it does is it brings a few things to the decision making that we execute here at BLM. It brings science in here, and that's really kind of the thing that people most associate with the Environmental Policy Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, is that we analyze resources and are using the best available science to help make those decisions. In addition to that, it allows us to develop alternatives, and we receive a proposed action from an applicant, for example, in this case, for a solar project, and then there's alternatives to that. One of which was always going to be the no action alternative, the essentially do nothing alternative, if you will. Then there's a proposed action, and then there's alternatives to that as well, that sort of are informed by the kind of third leg of the stool here in NEPA, which is public participation. And that's really what we're brought here today for, is to gather insights on the issues that need to be analyzed, essentially the aspects of the environment, both human environment and ecological environment out there that need to be analyzed in the EIS, as well as the public perspectives on what alternatives should be analyzed and compared to the no action alternative and our proposed action alternative. So this is really where we're at today. And you're going to have the opportunity to comment on the proposal during the scoping meeting at the end, as well as 30 additional days that we have to go. Next slide, please. This is how you'll submit comments. There's a few different ways to do it. You can do it via e-planning. That is the project website. And we have a link here. And if somebody could put that into the chat online here, we'll put that in there so you can quickly click on it and bookmark that in your browser, since that way you're not copying this down. And then, of course, once on e-planning, there'll be additional links for you to get to other project materials. Now I'm going to walk you through e-planning in just a second. So there's a place to get information and submit comments. Thanks, Adam, for putting that up. You can email comments to this email address, blm_az_pdo_solar@blm.gov. So that email inbox is checked by staff in the Lower Sonoran Field Office, as well as me, and we'll make sure your comments are pulled off of there and appropriately recorded for our scoping report. You can also use U.S. mail, postal mail, and I'll put the address up there, and that will go to our Lower Sonoran Field Office up there in North Phoenix. And we're going to give 30 days plus a couple to do comments. The scoping period formally opened on July 7th, but we are going to open comments up for 30 days after this meeting. Just make sure everyone's got the time to look over the materials and get your comments in. Next slide, please. And let me do a quick share of my own screen here. So I am going to take control, or can I? Let's see, I can share. Here we go. I'm going to share my browser. And it'll be this one here. All right. Let me go to this window right here. This is the e-planning portal, and I'm just going to kind of do a walkthrough for those of you not familiar. This will be the splash page. If you just Google BLM e-planning, if you don't have a bookmark yourself, it'll bring you to this, and you can scroll down and you'll see active participation periods, and there should be a shortcut in here, including link to somewhere when you get into the final 10 days. This is where it'll start to kind of, escalate down here to see what's going on. But the best way to get to it is you just go over here to project name. You can type in Vulcan Solar, or you can go to that link that we just shared directly. If you search on this, you're going to get a list here. Vulcan Solar Project is what you're looking for. Click on that, and this is the web page. So this link that is in the chat will take you directly here. And to just kind of orient you a bit of what's on here, we have contact information for the primary project manager on this project, Matt Drainick. So you can reach out to him if you're having trouble. There's a brief project description here of what's being proposed. And then we have this what's new box, and this will get updated throughout. So this content may change depending on when you drop in, and we'll sort of update this as we update other elements on the page. There's just some basic information. The real heart of the page is over here in the menu on the left. I'm going to kind of just go through these really quickly so you can see what we've got available for you. Under documents, this is going to start to grow a little bit. Right now, we don't have a lot. We're starting off the project. We have the notice of intent, and you can click on that and actually bring up the Federal Register notice that was published on July 7th and that kicked off the scoping process. So that is here, right here, the notice of intent. Scroll down. So we got that stored there, and then we have a copy of this presentation that we're giving right now is available for you to browse and reference here as well. We'll be putting some additional documents up here related to like the solar variance process that cleared over a year ago, but there was some other background information we can share that we learned out of there. When we get to draft environmental impact statement documents and technical reports and other things, we're just going to keep adding them to the documents page, and we'll keep this nice and organized for you. So that's under documents. Under maps, we have a whole bunch of maps that we put up. Right now, these are what we're calling scoping maps, a lot of information maps, some of which we'll share in our presentation, and we might reference a few of these as we go through the day. But, you can see, for example, visual resource management, and you click on that and we'll have a map that opens up, and this is printable as well in 8.5 by 11 format, and it will just open up a PDF showing our visual resource management designations over the proposed project of where it is at right now. So that is will give you some food for thought as you're thinking through this project. Under map data, we have a footprint right now, and this is a KMZ file. So this file, if you download it and double click on it, it'll open up in Google Earth. And that is, a widely used mapping software that you can sit on your desktop, and super easy to use, really intuitive, and you don't need any fancy software on that. We'll get a shapefile up here as well for those of you that do work with ArcGIS and more advanced systems, and you can take it in there and overlay your other layers on it. But so we'll have some raw data in there. We have how to get involved, just as a calendar here of what's going on. We've got 2 dates on there right now, the meeting tonight, and then the scoping period, which will close on August 28th. And then the participate now, and this is where I want to just spend a couple of minutes on. The participate now is where you can enter in your comments or your perspectives that you want to share right now during the scoping period directly through e-planning. So you can send us an email, that'll work. You can send us postal mail, that'll work too. And but you can also send it straight in off of here, and it'll all go to the sort of same spot. And you'll click on that, and you'll have to put in some information, your comment. You can upload a letter if you prefer that way, rather than typing out a letter in there. You'll have to put your name in there. We cannot guarantee that your information remains private. You know, we're not publicizing any information, but you're entering something into the public record. So just an awareness for you on that. So that is what we've got here. We can just cancel that submission out. And as long as you can take care of that by the 28th, you'll be all good and be formally in the record for scoping. So that is just a quick rundown I want to do, and I will stop sharing my screen and move on back to the presentation here. And if you can bring back up the slides. Great, so next slide. This is a timeline of the EIS, the Environmental Impact Statement. We have the Notice of Intent. We got to get that date set up. It wasn't published until the 7th, but that was published on July 7th. And then July 7th to 28th is the scoping period. That's where we're at right now. And we have the scoping meeting. We are estimating that a draft environmental impact statement and resource management plan amendment will be available in what's called a notice of availability, or an NOA, that will be published, we hope, in about February of 24, and that'll open up a 90-day public comment period. So that's something to look forward to. You'll have 90 days to review that draft environmental impact statement and comment on the content in there, the analysis that's in there, and we'll probably do another meeting at that point based on the interest that we have to kind of roll out what we've learned and invite comments again. So just stay tuned for that. After the draft, BLM and our contractors will go back to work, and we'll come back with a final environmental impact statement and proposed resource management plan amendments, typically informed by what we receive in those 90 days. And we'll put that out there, and we're aiming for a record of decision. That would be when a decision is made about the project in terms of whether or not to authorize it, and if it is authorized, with what restrictions, stipulations, terms and conditions under which it would be authorized would be rendered. And that's going to be estimated in January 2025. And so this is the NEPA timeline. This is just the permitting part of it for just the BLM permit. We can talk more about kind of anticipated timelines. If NEPA is favorable for the project, what construction and operation timeline would look like, and that'll come a little bit later in the presentation. Next slide, please. One other thing I wanted to kind of clear up here, actually I got two other things, but this is one of them. In that notice of intent, that NOI that was published opening the scoping, we also included in there a notice of segregation. So based on regulations at 43 CFR 2804.25, BLM is allowed to segregate public lands from mineral entry for an application of right-of-way for solar energy development. This really is aimed for us to be able to effectively manage, these competing land uses that may be out there. There were no mining claims that were affected by this. And so right now, no mining claims would be accepted within that proposed project area for a period of 2 years. So that's just what the segregation notice is. That will expire in 2 years unless we re-notice another 2 years of segregation, at which point we would run out of options on segregation at that. Next slide, please. And this is the second one that I wanted to kind of bring out of the notice of intent, is our resource management plan amendment. This project is being proposed under the Lower Sonoran Resource Management Plan. That has been amended a couple of times for decisions pertaining to solar energy. One of them is the Western Solar Plan. It's oftentimes called the Solar PEIS. And that lays out what lands are available and what lands are not available for solar energy development. In the case of this project, the lands that are available would be partially a solar energy zone called the Gillespie Solar Energy Zone. That's included in the project, as well as other lands that are called solar variance lands. And the director granted a solar variance last year to include those lands with this project. And so those two kind of come together out of the Western Solar Plan, or Solar PEIS. There are some additional requirements that come out of another amendment called the Restoration Design Energy Project, or RDEP, RDEP for short. And in there is a decision that says no solar facilities will be sited in utility corridors. This project is proposing to site approximately to site solar energy panels, essentially, within approximately 921 acres of a designated utility corridor. That would require a plan amendment because that area is otherwise excluded. So we will be evaluating that plan amendment as a part of this EIS. And the scoping of this, the purpose of this meeting right now is to get some feedback on that as well. So we're not just talking about the project and its impacts on issues. We're also talking about specifically the resource management plan amendment that may be needed to authorize the project as is proposed. The scope of this land use planning process does not include addressing evaluation or designation of any areas of critical environmental concern or other planning designations. Those are called ACECs. So we are not accepting ACEC nominations as a part of this process. Next slide, please. This is the project location, and I will kind of start off now that we've gotten the lecture about policy and formalities out of the way. We can start talking about the project in a little bit more detail and what's been proposed. The project site is about 47 miles southwest of Phoenix, and the nearest town is Arlington. This is going to be about starts about 7-8 miles east of the town of Arlington. And for those of you in the Phoenix area, it's a beautiful drive out there. Headed south from Buckeye, and then just keep working your way west out to the project area. What I wanted to include on this slide is some context out here of where this project is sited. You can see there's a lot of undeveloped desert, of course, for this project out there. The project outline is in blue, so there's 4 blocks being proposed as part of this project. That bigger block kind of sitting right in the middle of the picture encompasses most of the solar energy zone of that Gillespie solar energy zone. So that's kind of the anchor of the project, if you will. And you'll see the proposed transmission line, the generation tie line, or gen tie line as it's called, runs north and will sort of zigzag around, working its way to a substation where the energy produced by this plant would be transmitted off to the grid. The context that I wanted to add, and if you kind of look down in that lower left corner, you'll see that this is really a spot where there's a lot of other energy infrastructure out there. It's what makes this place kind of an advantage for solar energy, and some of that logic went into the designation of a solar energy zone out there over a decade ago. There is, of course, to the north, the Palo Verde nuclear generating station, so Arizona's own only nuclear generating facility, and you'll see that in the cooling ponds just south of that, up to this kind of north end of the picture. There's a number of solar energy projects in development out there, both developed and operating, and then also being phased into bigger projects. These are projects not authorized by the Bureau of Land Management, so they are either on private land or they are on state land. And there's the Sunstreams project out there, the Mesquite Solar project out there, and then Arlington Valley Solar Energy project out there. So 3 different projects, all of which have like multiple phases going on. So that's present out in that area as well. And then there are 2 natural gas generating plants out there additionally. And you can see Mesquite generating station is there, and then the Red Hawk generating station. I think one is for APS and one is for SRP. So lots happening in terms of energy generation out there. Vulcan is right below that stuff, right to the south in the blue outline. Next slide, please. The purpose and need for the project. So purpose and need is really fundamental to NEPA, establishing why BLM is undertaking this in the first place. The applicant has a purpose and need. It's to, see the project be developed. But BLM, our need here is to respond to the application. We're required under our regulations to accept an application and respond to it on a case-by-case basis. So the purpose and need for this action is to respond to Vulcan Solar's application for a right-of-way to construct, operate, maintain, and decommission a solar photovoltaic and energy storage project and associated facilities on public land. We are also, like I said, considering a resource plan amendment that would require that it would be required in order to allow the project to build in a designated energy transmission corridor. Next slide, please. Underpinning kind of the purpose and need, are some other BLM priorities. And I think it's important that we get these out and again, add some more context to the project as well. We are a multiple use agency. Of course, we manage public lands for multiple uses. And one of those multiple uses that we are charged with managing for is renewable energy production. And so we are required by Congress under the Energy Act of 2020, Section 3104, to seek to permit 25 gigawatts of electricity from wind, solar, or geothermal projects by 2025. This particular project, as proposed, would be over a gigawatt of that. So that is a pretty significant chunk of power, about 5% of that overall goal. So that is a big chunk towards that, and that is meeting our legislative requirements there. We're also under President Biden's executive order 14008 and tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. So again, we have a 25 by 25 target in there with a goal to deploy 30 gigawatts of offshore wind and 15 gigawatts a total of 30 gigawatts, both onshore and offshore by 2035, and then 25 gigawatts onshore by 2025. So those two things kind of come into play here, and they're definitely, driving our work here at BLM is to, meet these mandates that have been given to us. Additionally, though, we cannot deny the other sort of mandates that we're under, one of which is to adhere to our multiple use and sustained yield mission outlined under the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, or FLPMA, that is enshrined in that Lower Sonoran Resource Management Plan, which is why we always turn to our plan as a kind of guiding documents, as well as ensuring that we conduct an appropriate environmental analysis in accordance with NEPA. So we have those other requirements as well. We're certainly, embracing the priorities that are given to us by Congress and the president, but we are also, working within the guardrails that are set up with NEPA and FLPMA as well. So hopefully that adds some context to what we're doing here. Next slide, please. On to preliminary alternatives. So when we're talking about alternatives, we're talking actually about the project itself and how it may be designed. We have the proposed action. The proposed action was proposed by Vulcan Solar LLC. It's a wholly owned subsidiary of Candela Renewables. They're the applicant, and we may refer to them as the applicant or Vulcan Solar. They've proposed a 7,374 acre solar energy facility, like I said, spread across those 4 blocks, plus an additional generation tie line to actually get that to the substation. So that's the proposed action. That's what we're working with. We're also analyzing a corridor exclusion alternative. Given that the proposed action at its face is not in conformance with the land use plan, we are almost triggered to analyze a plan that would, a project that would be in conformance with the land use management plan. And so that would be the project as proposed minus that 921 acres that is within the designated energy transmission corridor. So no RMP amendment would be required for that, and no RMP amendment would be granted if this alternative was chosen. And then under NEPA, we're required to analyze a no action alternative, and that would be to deny the application, and therefore no RMP amendment would be required, and that would be the end of it. There would be no project out there. We are inviting the public. Part of the scoping meeting is to invite the public to provide comments on these 3 alternatives that we have, our kind of preliminary alternatives, if you will, in addition to proposing other alternatives that may be out there. And we can talk a bit about what those alternatives may look like. If you're familiar with the NEPA process, oftentimes those alternatives will be grouped around issues, and alternatives that seek to address particular issues. And when I give this mic back to David in a few minutes, he can talk a little bit about how those will fit together. Next slide, please. All right, here we go. So proposed action rundown really quick here. Like I said, just over a gigawatt, 1,050 megawatts of power output capacity. That would be what's called the nameplate capacity of the project, up to 7,374 acres. This is a photovoltaic project. There would be battery energy storage system out there as well. Sometimes that's shorthanded BESS, BESS. Panels would be mounted on single axis trackers or fixed tilt, depending on how the engineers take a look at that solar resource and take a look at their technology. There would be DC collection lines. That's that direct current that gets collected, that is inverted into AC, and that AC power is transmitted, like I said, over to the grid and carried out to the Arizona grid. Project substation would be required. That'd be about 5 acres for a substation where those collector lines would plug into. The genties are going to be about, as it's proposed right now, 11 miles long to the Hasayampa substation out there. Additionally, the proposed project would include an O&M building area. That O&M is for operations and maintenance. This would be your admin building, where there might be offices, workers can meet, break rooms, stuff like that. Just a simple building out there for an additional 5 acres within that 7374 proposed. Next slide, please.
Sure. I'm going to back you up when I had my screen flash
Oh,
there.
sure.
I missed a figure you wanted to show that showed the corridors.
Yes, I thought there was something missing. Thanks for catching that. Yeah. All right. My cursor probably won't show up and on this. David, I don't know if you might be able to use your cursor to kind of show that area where that utility corridor is. When we're talking about the scope of the plan amendment, we're looking at this designated corridor right there in that kind of periwinkle blue or purple that works its way north through those 2 blocks at the east edge of the project. And you can see that overlap of that kind of periwinkle blue into those 2 blocks. That sum total is 921 acres. These corridors are really important to ensure that energy can be moved around the west, right? We're generating all this energy out here, but how does it get to market? We need some space to do that. Part of what we've analyzed initially in this, and just in that solar variance process, is that this corridor dead ends into a solar energy project at the other end, permitted on state land. Of course, our corridors are only designations that apply to federal land, and we hope that there's cooperation with state or private land outside of federal land, but that's not always the case. Private parties in the state can manage their lands in their jurisdiction as they see fit. And so in this case, the reason why we are entertaining a plan amendment is because this corridor, at least at that end of it, has been rendered a bit obsolete, just because there's really no way to move power further north through that corridor. And that's part of the reason that generation tie line, that transmission line coming out of that other block is not in a corridor, and that has to move, to where there's essentially available space, and it can't sort of cross over that other project. So I just wanted to kind of point that out really quickly so you're kind of oriented around where the plan amendment scope is in this. Thanks. All right, now we can go 2 slides ahead. Thanks. So the phasing of the project, here's what we know, and I'll kind of like talk through it a bit. Project is ultimately going to be analyzed, will be a plan of development, and that's something that is being worked up right now and being finished. But there's the kind of fundamentals that are in a plan of development that I want to cover right now to, again, like get the wheels turning in all your brains. The initial phase is a construction phase. This would start with fencing off the approved area. And then there'd be civil site improvements on site. Those may include new access roads, equipment staging areas, heavy equipment staging areas, drainages, culverts. They're building a project area that needs to accommodate heavy equipment and also be stabilized for the facilities that may be built out there. Vegetation removal as needed for civil improvements, and a fire fuel break. So the fire fuel break is something that's not really negotiable in there. The vegetation removal is something that is going to be developed through that plan of development and analyzed in NEPA. In this project here, this is a project that's actually under construction in Buckeye. This is the Sonoran Solar Energy Project, so not far away from this project. Their site design required essentially stripping off the vegetation entirely within the project area. And this is what the project looked like about 6-7 months ago when it was under construction. The vegetation is removed. You can see kind of roads are put in, and then these structures called racks are assembled, and then on these racks they will mount the panels. And so that's the one kind of look at what the project may look like if it was to be authorized in the construction phase. Next slide, please. Here's a couple more: installation of racks, panels, and other equipment, and the construction of that major overhead transmission line, that 500 kV line that would go off to the Hasayampa substation is proposed. So again, this is a little bit more advanced picture of Sonoran Solar up in that upper picture. You can see, an access road running through the site, what the panels look like once they're mounted. And then this is a picture of Sonoran Solar's generation tie line going to the Kamatki substation down there in Buckeye. So just a couple other pictures of what that may look like during construction. Next slide, please. We'd move into an operational phase. So after construction, there would be reclamation of temporary disturbance areas. So some plants may be salvaged and replanted. There may be some revegetation of areas that are not critical for the operations of the project, but were necessary for, like for staging and construction equipment or whatnot. The operational phase would be for a right-of-way grant up to 30 years with the potential for subsequent renewal. Operations throughout the years would be, panel washing as needed during the year, vegetation and weed management. If there is substantial disturbance on site, there may be the need to address vegetation growth that could interfere with equipment, or weeds that are proliferated or brought on site inadvertently by maintenance crews or just blowing on site. Environmental monitoring is always a part of project operations. These projects may have impacts on vegetation, there may be impacts on wildlife, and as part of any authorization, BLM is likely to include various environmental monitoring protocols, and those are developed with, through information that we come to through NEPA. Equipment repair and replacement, panels do burn out, they may need to get repaired, and then just other general maintenance to include and to ensure safe operation of the plant. Per federal security regulations, the site would remain fully restricted from unauthorized access. That's something that BLM can't really negotiate. That is a FERC consideration. These are not only kind of dangerous areas with all the high voltage running through there, but they're also a part of the nation's infrastructure and their grid. So the site would be fully fenced off and remain fenced off, closed to public access. There are fence options out there. And again, as informed through NEPA, there may be fence options that are allow wildlife in, or if wildlife get in, they allow wildlife out. They might keep predators out, so there's some variations on fencing what it is, but generally speaking, public access would be completely prohibited out there. On-site staff may be up to 22 employees. I think that would be like at the peak of some maintenance for the most part. Most solar facilities only have a couple of employees out there working on a daily basis. Again, that top picture is from Sonoran Solar in Buckeye, and you can see that is the way that that project was authorized and put under construction. The project in the picture below that is Gemini Solar out in Moapa, Nevada, and this project is in a different ecosystem, of course, in the Mojave Desert. But that project was really designed with minimal vegetation disturbance, and so in terms of reclamation, they have a lot less work to do on reclamation of vegetation out there. It actually is helping that project with stormwater management. They have to do less civil improvements out there, less civil engineering, and this project, as it kind of evolves through NEPA, and we'll be taking a look at those issues, we'll be able to kind of determine whether or not this project needs to essentially take a heavy hand to the environment, and strip vegetation and grade, or if the project may be able to take a lighter hand to the environment. And a lot of that is still to be developed in the plan of development, but that's certainly something that we're receiving comments on, and we're welcome to those comments, so I'll just kind of leave it at that, and we can talk more about that if we get some questions. Next slide, please. Finally, there's a reclamation and closure, and this is pretty far down the line, but after the project's useful life, the power plant would be decommissioned and existing facilities and equipment would be removed. So our initial authorization would be for 30 years. I think, there's Also some potential changes on the horizon about what an authorization may be. And, right now on our projected schedule, a grant wouldn't be authorized for another couple of years if the project was to move favorably. There may be different rules about that. So there may be a 30 or maybe 35 years. I've seen, proposals for higher than that. But as of right now, under the regulations that we're working with, it would be for a 30-year right-of-way grant. When I talk about the project's useful life, that's BLM's grant, and that's sort of like, I guess you could say, the official word of it. But panels may not have a 30-year lifespan. A power purchase agreement, that agreement to negotiate offtake for power, may not be 30 years. And so when I say useful life, it's also when the operator may no longer have the need for the project, the off-taker. So it could be up to 30 years. Like I said, there may be an opportunity to renew beyond that. If the project is no longer useful at some point in that time, it would have to be decommissioned. And part of that decommissioning would be to remove all the equipment, to return the site in the area to a condition appropriate for other public uses. So it would be reopened to multiple use, if you will. Part of that plan of development that is in the works right now is a decommissioning and reclamation plan. And that would be adopted as a part of any authorization. So that would really guide and hold the operator to standards of what we expect that land to be returned to ensure that BLM collects a bond as well. And BLM will be holding that bond so the taxpayers are not left on the hook to essentially clean up a decommissioned power plant out there. If the operator was to abandon the facility, BLM would tap that bond and contract out reclamation in and of itself. That's the reclamation and closure phase. So those three phases are really, what is the basis of the proposed action. You've got the footprint, and then you've got these three phases that, have activities in them that will feed into our NEPA analysis. Next slide, please. This is just a quick, non-exhaustive list of other permits and authorizations. And I bring this up because we are in a public meeting phase, and we're not the only players in this game. Of course, we have the underlying land, and in many ways, our decision's a big one and a heavy one, and we have NEPA to help us with our public participation. But there's going to be a number of other permits or agency interventions throughout this project. And this is just a little bit of a list of things that you may want to browse and inquire about other public participation opportunities, especially on issues that really fall outside of BLM's jurisdiction. So we have, federal involvement here. There may be a 404 permit that would be decided by the Army Corps of Engineers, biological opinions and incidental take permits from Fish and Wildlife Service. If you look at state permits, there'll be consultation with the Arizona State Historic Preservation Office. Arizona Game and Fish will be a consulting and a cooperating agency as well. Traffic issues are going to be addressed by Arizona Department of Transportation, particularly, encroachment permit for facilities on roads that fall under their jurisdiction. There'll be an Arizona Corporation Commission, line siting committee, certificate of environmental compatibility. I believe they accept public comments as well. And then there's local permits from Maricopa County, include dust controls, stormwater discharge, encroachment permits to Agua Caliente Road. And I can't speak to how robust their public process is, but if you're interested you should certainly reach out to those authorities and see what opportunities maybe you have to comment or participate in hearings that they have as a part of granting those permits. Next slide, please. And here is the overall project estimated timeline. You want to take it away from here, David?
Yeah, you've been going through quite a heavy load of information. I'll give you a break.
All right, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. So getting the NEPA process, which is what we're in right now. We're at the very, very beginning of the NEPA process. And as explained earlier, we expect this to be completed in early 2025. But there's a lot more to go. The construction phases that he just went through there, that's estimated to take another 3 years to put the site preparation and get all the facilities installed, with a start date anticipated right now to be in 2029. And as Derek was explaining, the 30 years is kind of the anticipated life of it at this time. So out to 2059. we added this here, to give some context of what's out there now. We had some good photos from some other sites where things have gone in, but we wanted to share what the conditions are out there now. So these are actually taken within the project area. You can see there are some existing transmission lines out there, and a lot of open land. Back focusing on the NEPA process here, at the beginning, reaching out to the public and other entities is issue development. Derek covered the purpose and need, which is the first thing you address with NEPA. You have to have a need that you're addressing. And then you start looking at what the issues are, and that is the real important part of what we're doing with the public now is identifying the issues. We do this through scoping, that's internal scoping and external. So the BLM is working on one. They've come up with some anticipated issues, and we use this scoping process to identify more. Some of the preliminary issues that the BLM has identified, and these are identified in the notice of intent. So those have been published. The ground disturbance throughout the site, reduction in authorized grazing, vegetation removal, limitations on recreation and access, land use changes, impacts to wildlife and migratory birds, future siting flexibility for linear utilities. That really focuses on the RMP amendment, the plan amendment, as well as visual resources, cultural resources, Native American concerns, and then the human environment part of like social impacts and environmental justice. So those are all things that we identify as pretty common to these types of projects. And so we'll be evaluating those. When you identify issues, and also we look at this through scoping as well, of looking ways to address the issues. As stated earlier, that could be through modifying or looking at a project alternative. Is there a way you can modify it, still meet the purpose and need, but avoid or minimize issues? We can also identify design features and best management practices that would be incorporated into the decision from the BLM as a requirement to be incorporated in the plan of development for the final project. And then you develop plans to implement these design features, as the final approved plan. And this is just an example of some pretty common type ones that are developed for projects like this to minimize the impacts where we have found issues. Pretty similar to the issue slide, because these are the resources that we anticipate looking at in the EIS. And so that's something also you would look at. These are what we anticipate covering, but comments from the public can also point out to other ones that maybe we haven't thought of yet, or haven't been identified yet, or could use additional investigation. So keep that in mind when you're developing comments on the project. Anything towards the issues, the alternatives, or resources, any concerns out there. These are available on the project website that we saw through the walkthrough earlier. Some early ones, again, the draft EIS will contain a lot more information, but at this stage, we've put some resources together for people to look at and be able to understand the project in a little more detail for what might be of interest to their particular concerns. And these are all available on the project website. An example of what's out here. This is the regional energy resources, as Derek was describing earlier, all that in the context of what's out there, what else is out there right now. Range resources to look at the potential impacts and the overlap of the project. It's might be a little hard to see on screens there, but the grazing allotments are showed there in the kind of diagonal hatch, and so that this project does occur on top of those. Submitting comments, we're going to have a Q&A session here today, but and that's going to be useful to really help you understand maybe some of the details we've gone over, or understand how to comment. But it would be most useful if you can submit your comments officially through one of these mechanisms here by August 28th. We try and look at comments, whenever the BLM is contacted, you consider them, but to really get incorporated into the EIS on a more formal level, it's important to try and get us those written comments in through one of these forums. Additionally, I think this information has been copied to the chat, so you can, copy and paste it if you don't want to have to try and write this down. And I'm going to repeat this information here because it's really important of how to get additional information. Again, everything's going to be posted on the project website as documents and reports are developed. They'll be posted there. Updates to the project schedule will be posted there. That's an important place to track it for following this project. And that brings us to our Q&A session. I'll note that we ran a little over what I expected. So our original plan was to start a presentation over for people that maybe joined late at 5 o'clock. I think right now would make the most sense is we still want to open the opportunity for questions and answer. So we'll see how much interest there is on that. I'm double checking now. I don't see that any questions have been submitted. If you have some now, please type them in the Q&A box to start a discussion, and we can address those. And we'll give that several minutes for people to think about that. If there's anything that they want to ask about or comment on, and depending on interest, we will repeat the presentation if needed.
David, we may be having some technical trouble with the Q&A box. And so what I would do is invite attendees to type into the chat. And we should have a chat box open, meeting chat. And for attendees, if you look at the top part of your interface, there should be a little chat function. You can type a message in there. And so we can try that.
That's a good suggestion, Derek. I don't think we have too large of a crowd to open up, and we can look at whatever mechanisms work best for folks.
All right, we do have a question that came in. What would be the protocol for the decommissioned panels? I don't have an answer for that. That would be disposal of private property. I would assume that, industry standards would either be to recycle or salvage to some degree, but I don't think that would be a part of BLM's decision per se. we can definitely find a better answer for that. You know, I don't know what the what would be best for those panels. Like I said, at the end of their useful life, which may be 20 or 30 years down the road. But good question.
Well, at least we know the chat feature is there. I will point out, in case anyone's having a hard time finding it, should be in your Teams application. Maybe if I stop sharing, it might be easier for folks to find. But on the top bar, there's a little chat. Looks like a little voice box.
All right, we have another question from David. Thanks, David. How would the arrays be removed and the land be restored? That will be coming out in the plan of development and part of that site decommissioning and reclamation plan. So you know, typically what BLM looks for in reclamation is for the land to be returned to the condition it was in before the authorization was granted. There'd be a substantial disturbance out there, so it's, you know, the plan wouldn't be something that could happen overnight. I think typically reclamation plans are about a 2 or 3 year process of how that comes together, but it may be recontouring the land, restoring natural drainage function if any of that was interrupted by the construction, removal of all equipment on site. So that may include like new excavation to remove that equipment. That equipment would be removed from the site, you know, fences brought down, and then there would be reseeding with native seeds. That's typically a part of the reclamation process, and then monitoring for the restoration of that vegetation. So there's usually a 2 or 3 year kind of standards that need to be met to ensure that that reclamation is taking, that revegetation is taking. And so all the details of that will be forthcoming into a plan of development, which will be shared with the draft EIS. And so that's a required element to that plan, and we'll keep working on it. Right, we have another question from Edward. Why this location? It is not flat and a lot of it is prone to flooding. I can't speak on behalf of the applicant. I can speak on sort of behalf of BLM. Um, we we don't choose locations per se. I mean, in this particular project, there was a designation for a solar energy zone, which was seen as a site that would be amongst the least impactful sites to identified resources out there, ecological and cultural and socioeconomic resources. So that is a kind of an attractor, if you will, like a pull to invite applicants to take a look at that. And I think that for the most part, applicants look at areas that are favorable for transmission and interconnection. There may be a flat site, but if there's no power lines in that vicinity and no access to that, or it would be profoundly impactful on other resources, it's not a good candidate for a site. But that notwithstanding, like I said, I don't want to spend too much time thinking about the logic of siting projects. I can kind of speculate on that. But here at BLM, we have to respond to applications. And so when an application comes in, part of that purpose and need is to take it as it comes. We are not out there soliciting applications. We are not out there trying to cite projects. We are definitely a reactive agency. And so if a project comes in And as you allude to, that it may present engineering challenges that would require quite a bit of work on the landscape, or there may be flood hazards created or existing that may not be mitigated. We'll have to analyze those in NEPA and see how those play into the decision that we make. And I know that can be not the most satisfying of answer at BLM, which is like, I don't know, we just take it when it comes here, but that is the kind of position that we're in here, is that we're not generating the site ourselves, other than, like I said, putting a kind of an attraction out there with that solar energy zone. I will leave it open in case somebody else wants to chime in on that and address that. Anybody can come off mute and contribute.
Just for clarification, when you're, anyone from the BLM presenter team, I think we have mics turned off for the public.
And Edward, on the issue of flooding, surface hydrology is definitely a part of the environmental analysis that we'll look at, and it's definitely a part of what some of the other agencies that are permitting look at as well, including Army Corps of Engineers, and the impacts that a project may have on floodplains out there. So, as an issue, it's something to be analyzed. Thank you. All right, we have another question from David. Will there be an intensive effort to search for rare and endangered plants and animals, and also a more in-depth search for cultural sites, meaning boots on the ground? Um, uh, we do require a number of surveys that will inform impact analysis on issues like rare plants, rare and endangered plants, as well as cultural resources. On the cultural resources, I'll start with that, and then I know we have an expert, a botanist here, who can help out on talking about the plants in just a second. On the cultural resources, there will be a requirement of a Class 3 survey, which is a pedestrian survey, essentially boots on the ground, walking up and down in grid squares, looking for cultural resources out there, working on a report, and in that report including the fines and the recommendations about whether or not they're eligible for the historic register. That report is really fundamental and foundational to BLM's responsibility to engage with tribes and with the state through the State Historic Preservation Office on consultation under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. So, long answer to say absolutely yes, cultural sites will be surveyed, will be recorded, and will be subject to a lot of discussion about what could be avoided, what treatment may be needed for sites out there. And that's a long iterative process that is a part of NEPA. Well, the impacts are disclosed in NEPA, but that whole process kind of follows in a parallel stream under what we call Section 106 consultation. So much work has been done, and there's much work yet to be done on that front, and it'll all be in process here. To the first part of your question on botany, I'll invite our botanist to come off of mute and talk a bit about the protocol for surveys on rare and endangered plants.
Yeah, so there was sort of a desktop survey of rare plants, and based on the data that is available, it doesn't seem like there's a good chance of having rare plants here. Um, so the project will be required to do some degree of vegetation surveys, but it's unclear at this point whether there will be a requirement for a more intensive survey for rare and endangered plant species, or but in terms of wildlife species, certainly they're currently actually working on desert tortoise um, surveys trying to do an intensive desert tortoise survey right now, or between now and August, I think. And even though those weren't classified as endangered, they are still a BLM special status species. So there is some effort going into that as well.
Thanks, Chris. And David, that information from those reports and an analysis of the impacts will be certainly included in the environmental impact statement, that draft environmental impact statement. Both of those are, or I should say all three, both plants, animals, and cultural resources are you know, just about in every single environmental impact statement out there. They're really fundamental to our analyses. So thanks for bringing those up. And thanks, Chris, for jumping in there. What I will do right now, while we're waiting for any other questions or comments to come in, of course, feel free to put those into the chat. If you are interested in sticking around for a repeat of the presentation, if you joined a bit late or weren't able to make it when we kick things off, we can certainly run down this presentation again. But we don't want to just talk to ourselves. So if you're here and you want to stick around for the presentation, if you could throw a little thumbs up or throw a hand up or just say, I'd like to stick around over in the chat. And that way we know we have some interest, and we'll give it a couple more minutes for this round of questions. And if there's interest, we can run through the presentation again and accept some more questions and comments that might come up at the end. We're here for another hour if you need us. All right, Judy would like to stick around. Welcome, Judy. And Judy, that might have been my fault. I know I emailed you, and I think I had my time zones mixed up in my head. So apologies. We will definitely give a rundown of what we got.
And just for folks that are did see it and are that may not want to stick around, I'm just going to stick this back up here for a minute just on how to submit comments. It is the most important part of the scoping process for us, is that you guys understand how to submit these comments, and invite you to submit them as they come up to you. Things to ask yourself about the comment, or if it's going to be useful to the BLM. Generally, they're looking for comments. Does it propose a new alternative or change to an alternative? Does the comment propose new mitigation measures to avoid a potential adverse effect? Does the comment raise an issue or a question such as, how would the project increase traffic on the road network? Obviously that's something we will be covering in the EIS, but those are the types of comments. Maybe some of them we wouldn't have. So please do consider that while you're doing that, as well as any comments on the RMPA amendment, as it relates to the economic or energy management of the area with the energy corridor.
All right, well, comments have seemed to gone quiet for a little bit right now, David. If we want to take this back up to the top, we can probably go a few slides in and dispense with the introductions in the background. And why don't we go back to the introductory page,
Sure.
and we can take it from there.
Yep, I'm going to stop share just for a second so nobody has to see the slides all go flying by. Okay, I do see we have a hand up from Laura. Laura, am I correct to assume that that means you'd also like to have this meeting go? We will turn it on. If it's something other than that, feel free to put it in the chat. Okay. This is the scoping meeting for the Vulcan solar project and the associated proposed amendment to the resource management plan. Tyler, Derek, and myself will be presenting some slides over this, giving you an overview of the project and how to participate. Tyler is the field manager for the Lower Sonoran Field Office. Tyler, would you like to introduce yourself?
Tyler had to step off, so it's going to be
Oh,
me.
that's right.
So yeah, that's all right.
problem.
Yeah, Tyler was only able to make it for the first part of the meeting. So my name is
Yep.
Derek Eisenbach. I am the Renewable Energy Program Manager, Program Lead for the BLM Arizona State Office. And I'm also kind of a senior project manager that helps out and troubleshoots on renewable energy statewide. So I'll be working with the Lower Sonoran Field Office on this project. Both with our resources that we have here at the state office and all the great people we have in the district and the field office there in Phoenix. We have a number of specialists on hand that are kind of hanging in the back. If we have questions about particular processes that touch their field or a particular resource question, they may be able to answer that, or we may be able to discuss that in a little bit more detail. But I won't bring them all off mute right now to introduce themselves. And of course, David Cox represents Tetra Tech. He is our project manager, assisting us at BLM on our NEPA compliance, our environmental impact statement, and he will be leading part of the presentation today, and I'll be leading part of it as well. Next slide.
Oh, and I'm going to add, it was on the previous
yeah,
slide.
yeah, go for it. I'm sorry.
No, that's right. I actually just remembered I started here with this, but I want to make sure everyone knows if you weren't, it should be clear up top, but this meeting is being recorded. So it'll be available for those that couldn't join, or if you want to go back and see it again. A copy of the presentation will also be shared on the project website. Microphones and cameras are disabled. You've probably figured that out by now, but feel free to use the chat box to ask any questions, and at the end of the presentation, we will look at those questions and respond to them at that time. We'll also share information on how you can comment on the project.
All right, is it over to me now, David?
You know what? I can do this if you'd like.
Oh no, I'll take it away. It's all good.
Right.
Okay, so the purpose of today's meeting is to provide an overview of the Vulcan Solar Project and the Resource Management Plan Amendment, or RMPA for short. And through this presentation today, we're going to be talking about the the National Environmental Policy Act and how the public can submit comments. And then, of course, at the end, we will have an opportunity to answer questions and help the public understand how to formulate substantive written comments for the development of the EIS and really kind of make it through scoping. Next slide, please. The National Environmental Policy Act. So I got a couple of slides here that, I want to kind of to open up a bit so you understand where we're coming from and understand a little bit more deeply the purpose of this meeting. National Environmental Policy Act goes back to 1969, and it's a federal law that requires federal agencies to consider the potential environmental impacts of any proposed actions before them before making a decision on that. We are complying with our requirements under NEPA by preparing an environmental impact statement. The public has an opportunity to comment on the proposal during scoping in the draft EIS through public review and comment period. And before we kind of flip slides, I kind of want to point out, as I like to do, that NEPA really has, some legs underpinning that stool. There is an importance to understand the science, right? We want our decisions to be driven by science, and so that is really at the forefront of our environmental impact statements are what environmental issues are being affected, and how are they being affected. What helps organize those impacts is an actual examination of alternatives, both the proposed action, what's been given to us to analyze, a no action, what if we said no, and alternatives to both of those, which is, well, maybe there's something that can be, meet the purpose and need of the project here, but it hasn't been proposed yet, and develop those alternatives. So that's kind of the second leg of the stool, is to broaden out the decision space, if you will, and not make it so binary as a yes or no. And then the final part of it is the public comment part of it as well. BLM does not want to be making decisions in a total vacuum. So we open up this process and scoping here to get issues out on the table and to ask the public for alternatives, and get their perspectives on what may be the best alternative, of what we have so far, what may be an alternative to what we have so far that we haven't thought about, or to bring out issues that we may not be aware of, or issues that you feel need to be elevated, to the forefront of the analysis. So that is really the kind of three big parts of the stool of NEPA. Next slide, please. This is just a quick slide about how to submit comments here. We have a link. We've put that over in the chat. This will take you to the project website, and you can click on that and bookmark that and save that to keep tabs on this. And I'm going to go over there in just a second to show you what we have over there. We have email address, BLM_AZ_PDO_solar. That is an email address box that will collect all kinds of comments that we have on our various solar projects, but I check that inbox. Our district staff checks that inbox, and so that's the best way to get your comment letters in, through email. You can also send them through postal mail as well, straight to the field office up in North Phoenix on Bell Road, and so that address is there as well. And this is all in the chat for you to copy and paste really quickly if you are keeping some notes somewhere. Next slide, please. And I am going to share my screen really quickly. Oops, and I took down, hold on. Oh, hold on one second.
While you're getting that set up, Derek, I'll just remind people as well, in that previous slide, it listed the comment period for scoping goes through August 28th. There was a difference between what was originally posted and the notice of intent. It's been extended to 30 days from this meeting. So make sure your comments are in by August 28th to be the most useful for BLM.
Thanks for clarifying that, David.
Yep.
All right, so there's a couple ways you can get to that website. We made it easy for you and just have that link that you can click on directly. You can also go to the BLM National NEPA Register kind of splash page. This is the e-planning page, and when we refer to e-planning, this is what we're talking about. If you type into the box Vulcan Solar, it'll bring up, I think there's just a couple of projects that have Vulcan in the title, and here it is, the Vulcan Solar Project, and this is the project website. So we've got this directly linked, and you can, like I said, copy and paste or click on that link out of the chat. But this is where you can also submit comments. You can get a lot of project information off of this. This is the first splash page that you go to. It'll have some basics about the project, some basic project description and what's new. So check here frequently if you're into this project. We have scoping meeting, this is what's new right now. If you come over and look on the left, you'll see we have a number of menus on the left, and this is where you really get to the guts of this page. If you go to documents, this will start to really fill up. The more documents that we produce, the more things are going to be transferred over here. Right now, we're in the earliest stages with scoping. So we have a, a document right here. This is the notice of intent that was published in the Federal Register. So you can just go back and read that if you want. That's the kind of legal notice. And then we have the presentation that we're giving right now. You can click on that if you've missed any of the presentation. But we'll be posting, technical studies, plans of development, important correspondence, important public notices, the draft environmental impact statement, other reports like a scoping report, when our scoping period closes, all kinds of stuff is going to end up over here under documents. We have a maps tab. Right now, we just have kind of information maps. These are static maps and not really interactive. We're going to see if we can do some interactive maps. TBD on that, see if we can get those developed. But right now you can look at static maps and, we have these maps on hand. We'll show you throughout the presentation here. You can download them yourself. And we've made some maps that we think will be important to help inform all you for scoping. You can just click on these and download them. They're all in PDF. They're all 8.5 by 11, and so pretty easily printable. Map data. Now, if you are getting even a little bit more sophisticated in your skills, you can download this KMZ file here, and you can open that in Google Earth. And you can, of course, use the tools in Google Earth to better understand what's around there. And we're going to get a shapefile up here too. And a shapefile, for those of you that use ArcGIS, know that you can take that into ArcGIS and then bring in your own data layers. And if you are working with an agency or working with a nonprofit or just a GIS professional yourself, you can actually make your own maps and do some analysis yourself of resource information that you may have. So we'll get that up there under map data. We got how to get involved as a calendar. So here we are today at public scoping. And then we have the scoping period closes. We'll start to fill in this calendar for other meetings or other milestones that we'll hit. And then this green button here, participate now, is where you can go and just submit comments straight away through here. So we'll take them by email. We'll take them by postal mail. You can hand deliver them if you want to. We'll take comments any way you get them, but maybe most convenient is to just click on the participate now, and you can enter in your information, either type it in here, or if you have a letter or you have other files that you want to attach, like your own maps or anything like that, you can upload files as well and enter your information and then go off and hit send, and we will get it. Just so you know, as a reminder, comments, we cannot guarantee anonymity in comments just because this is a public process and you are going on the record. So if you enter them that way, you may have, if you're really concerned about anonymity, there may be other ways that you can, get information to us without having to disclose that. So just a heads up on that. All right, and I'll go back and quit sharing here, and we can bring back up the presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. All right, next slide, please. Here's a timeline for the environmental impact statement. Now, this is the EIS is just kind of our discussion for permitting. So here we go with where we're at on the notice of intent was published on July 7th, not June 30th, just a little typo in there. We're hoping it would publish June 30th, but it was delayed a week. So July 7th is when the notice of intent was published, and we are accepting comments for scoping until August 28th on there. We anticipate a draft EIS, that is kind of the first stage of this analysis, will be available for the public, and that will publish in the Federal Register a notice of availability. And then that we anticipate will be available in about February 2024. We may have another public meeting after that with the notice of availability to actually talk about our findings and to solicit comments on that. That comment period will be open for a minimum of 90 days. So that's quite a long time, and we're anticipating that will close at about May 2024. I'll spend the summer of 2024 working on revisions and again publishing a notice of availability of a final EIS and proposed RMPA, and then ultimately BLM anticipates being able to render a decision on the project through a record of decision, or a ROD, in January 2025. So that's just a quick walkthrough of the schedule here. Next slide. In that notice of intent to prepare an EIS, there was also a notice of segregation. So I just want to kind of cover this so folks who aren't familiar with this aren't too confused. The notice of segregation is BLM's authority under 43 CFR 2804 to segregate public lands included in an application for a solar energy development right-of-way from operation of public land laws, including the mining law by publication. So what all that means is that it is right now closed to mineral claims. There were no mineral claims in this area, no mining claims in the project area to start. And for the next 2 years, BLM will not be accepting mineral claims in this site while we undergo this environmental impact statement. And this is really to try to separate these uses and make it easier for us to manage public land. So we're not working on one authorization while another authorization is attempting to get in there. So next slide, please. And then the resource management plan amendment was also noticed in the notice of intent. So the RMPA, as we abbreviate that, this is very specific to just one part of the project. So, in conformance with the Federal Land Policy Management Act, we have our Lower Sonoran Resource Management Plan. That's been amended by the Western Solar Plan from 2012, which designated that Gillespie Solar Energy Zone, which sort of, I'll talk about in a second, sits at the heart of the project, as well as solar variance lands around the edge of the project. And those variance lands were included in the project after a concurrence from the BLM director last year. But there's also additional decisions specific to Arizona. And one of those decisions is that solar energy developments, essentially solar energy panels, shall not be sited within designated utility corridors. And in this case, we have a designated utility corridor that runs through the proposed project site, and they overlap by about 921 acres. So in order for us to analyze this project in full, we also have to analyze the resource management plan that would be needed for that 921 acres to be essentially areas for solar energy development. Last thing on this slide, while we are undertaking a planning process here, this does not involve addressing or evaluating or designating any areas of critical environmental concern or ACECs, and so BLM is not considering ACEC nominations as a part of this process. And here is the project location. I wanted to throw this up really quick to orient some folks about what's going on around here. So where this project is sited, you'll see in the blue outline are the solar development blocks that are comprise the Vulcan Solar Project proposal. The green lines within are transmission lines that would be needed for the project. So transmission lines to bring the blocks together, and then a major 500 kV generation tie line running north out of the project to the Hasayampa substation. We wanted to kind of show some of the energy resources that are out there already that are essentially neighbors to this project. The BLM land, of course, is undeveloped, but just to the north, we have the Palo Verde Nuclear Generating Station, which is an APS facility in Arizona's only nuclear generating station. We have two natural gas plants, the Red Hawk plant and the Mesquite generating station. One's an SRP plant, one's an APS plant. And then we have three other large solar complexes that are not BLM related. They are on state land or private land, but we have Mesquite Solar, the Sunstream Solar Complex, and the Arizona, what was it called? The Arlington Valley Energy Facility. So lots going on with energy out there. And we had a question after the last session about like, why here? And I think that if you look at the amount of energy interconnect transmission opportunities in this area, that's a big part of the why here. The sun is great everywhere, but this project is doing its best to try to take advantage of some of the existing infrastructure out there that it can be a part of. Next slide, please. Purpose and need is another part and kind of a formality that I want to cover. And again, it might kind of dovetail on like, well, why is BLM doing this? The project has a purpose and need, of course. It's seeking a permit to operate the facility. But BLM's purpose and need is to respond to Vulcan Solar's application under 43 CFR 2804. If a company comes to BLM with a renewable energy right-of-way application, we are required to respond to that on a case-by-case basis. And so that is what we're doing. We are responding to Vulcan Solar's application for a right-of-way to construct, operate, maintain, and decommission a solar photovoltaic and energy storage project and associated facilities. And then, like I said, because of the overlap with the designated energy transmission corridor, we're also evaluating a resource management plan amendment. Thank you. All right, next slide, please. BLM priorities, I'll just kind of glance over these pretty quick. If you've been monitoring federal policy and BLM policy, you'll know that BLM is working under two mandates right now in a whole lot of attention given to renewable energy. Both the Energy Act of 2020, which was legislation out of Congress, Section 3104, required the secretary to seek to permit at least 25 gigawatts of electricity from wind, solar, or geothermal by 2025. So that was a kind of congressional mandate to find 25 by 25. And then President Biden's executive order 14008, again, reaffirmed that 25 by 25 of onshore renewable energy, which, as far as I know, is like 100% BLM. The Forest Service, to my knowledge, does not have any permitted wind or solar facilities. And so public lands, falls to BLM on that. And then, while we do have these mandates that kind of come, and I think, I've heard from folks say, well, it's political, and, certainly our Congress and president are, political offices. We have policy that is long-standing that provides some guardrails on those mandates that kind of come and go, and that includes the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, or FLPMA, as well as NEPA. And so FLPMA is the reason why we are looking at a land use plan amendment, and of course did a plan conformance check on the solar variance lands. And then NEPA is what we're in right now as far as the environmental impact statement. So we stay in conformance, within those guardrails while still addressing some of the other mandates that come our way. Next slide, please. So alternatives, I mentioned this a little bit before about alternatives, and we start with preliminary alternatives. We receive the proposed action. This is what our applicant has given us. The applicant is Vulcan Solar LLC, and they're a wholly owned subsidiary of Candela Renewables. And they've proposed the facility, as you saw on the map previously, and that is what we're calling the proposed action. We responded as well by looking at a corridor exclusion alternative. Basically, what they've proposed to us is not in plan conformance with respect to that overlap. So we are proposing an alternative that we will analyze and compare to the proposed action that would not require a plan amendment and would be essentially excise those 921 acres from the development. And then there's a no action alternative, and this is always required by NEPA to analyze and compare what a straight denial would look like if we just denied the right-of-way application, not grant an RMP amendment and things we consider as they were out there. So we provide those three alternatives up front. And then, part of this meeting and part of the scoping period is to actually invite the public and agencies and other concerned parties to submit alternatives that they feel should be considered, for centered around issues that may be important the BLM is missing. And David will pick up on that a little bit later in the presentation. Next slide, please. All right, here is a map of the proposed action, and I asked for this to come up so all attendees could see. And if you look towards the east side of that project there, you'll see that that is the overlap of that designated utility corridor and where that intersects. For the most part, BLM does not accept applications that are not in plan conformance unless there's reason to believe that the effects may be essentially minimal. In this case, that utility corridor, as you see working its way north, that kind of blue periwinkle, it ends off of public land into state and private land over which BLM has no jurisdiction. So our designation does not carry over into that area. And in this case, this corridor was essentially cut off. The utility of the corridor, like the actual function of it, was cut off by solar energy developments to the north. And so, there's evidence that we kind of looked at through the solar variance process that this corridor may be somewhat obsolete, and the best use of the lands may be to actually, consider them for solar energy rather than just saying they're straight out excluded. But so that is one reason why we're including that, and I just wanted to make sure that you all see that. There's a light green area there you see in that kind of middle part of the project. That is the Gillespie Solar Energy Zone. That was designated back in 2012 as a preferred area for solar energy development and seen as having some of the least potential for impacting resources in BLM, Arizona. So that's sort of the heart of the project. And then we have these other 3 blocks that are variance lands. Next slide, please. Just some project basics on this. The output capacity or nameplate capacity of the project would be just over a gigawatt, 1,050 megawatts. That's a big project, and the field footprint altogether over 7,000 acres, 73, 74 acres. All be photovoltaic or PV to abbreviate it, arranged in single access or fixed tilt trackers. Collection system would be DC within the arrays, and inverted into AC lines and then carried off to the Arizona grid. There would be battery energy storage system or BESS on site. There'd be a project substation about 5 acres in size is conceived right now. The GenTie, or that 500 kV line connecting the project to the Hassayampa substation, would be up to about 11 miles long. And there would likely be at least one O&M building occupying up to about 5 acres, and that would be for office space, storage space, stuff like that. Next slide, please. I'm going to kind of quickly walk through phases here. When we release the draft EIS, with that will come a pretty comprehensive plan of development. And that plan of development will really illustrate all the different areas that may be developed, impacts to be forced, that will be, or I should say the activities in those areas that will inform our impact analysis. Right now, what we're working with are some kind of preliminary plan of development. It's still kind of coming together, but I want to just kind of illustrate a bit of like what we know to be in the plan of development. We'll start with the construction phase. So the initial phase would start with fencing and closure of the approved area. Civil site improvements, including new access roads, equipment staging areas, drainages, all that would have to be put under construction. Vegetation would be removed as needed for those civil improvements, including a fire fuel break around the edge of the project for wildfire. Pretty low risk wildfire area out here, but nevertheless, vegetation clearance on that. The picture that you see here is mid-construction on the Sonoran Solar Energy Project in Buckeye, Arizona, nearby. And you can see that the construction techniques on this required quite a bit of vegetation removal. Lost the picture there, David. But quite a bit of removal of vegetation there down to a sort of bare earth. You can see there's been some leveling and grading out there, and then the installation of these piles and development of these racks. Next slide, please. Seem to be losing the slide here. Here we go. So like I said, the installation of racks, panels, collection lines would proceed after those civil improvements. There would be the construction of the major overhead transmission line, that GenTie line, and then construction would sort of conclude with reclamation of temporary disturbance areas ahead of commercial operations. So areas that are not kind of subject to, ongoing, ongoing involvement in the operation of the facility would be reclaimed at that point, so vegetation would be restored, fencing would be removed, any treatments that need to be done would be taken care of. These are, again, a couple of pictures of Sonoran Solar. The top picture is what Sonoran Solar arrays look like towards the end of completion of that. So what those kind of look like in terms of spacing. You can see the road improvement there. And then below that is the Sonoran Solar Gentai. Next slide, please. Operational phase. After construction concludes, the right-of-way grant would be issued for up to 30 years. That is where it stands right now. That is, of course, subject to change in regulations, and there's a lot of, policy that may be made to allow for longer grants or shorter grants or whatever. But BLM would, as of right now, would grant a right-of-way for up to 30 years if approved. Daily operations may include panel washing to get the dust off the panels for efficiency, vegetation and weed management, environmental monitoring for, invasive species or noxious weeds or impacts to like birds, for example. There may be environmental monitoring plans that come along with an authorization. There may be equipment repair and replacement if panels go bad or wires get cut or anything like that, storm damage, things like that. And then other general maintenance to include safe operation of the plant. One important thing to point out in public meetings is like per federal security regulations, the site would remain fully restricted from unauthorized access. These are high voltage areas as well as, parts of the nation's critical energy infrastructure. And so therefore security fencing would be up. There would be security lighting, probably security personnel on site, ensuring that the site remains secure. On-site staff may be up to 22 employees. Probably daily, it'd probably be a little bit less. I think I've seen 10 around most, but up to 22. So there'd be a little bit of a traffic impact out there, but not great. The two pictures we have here on the top, if you could just go back, so the top is again that Sonoran Solar site. The bottom is Gemini Solar, and this is in Moapa, Nevada, in the Mojave Desert, a little bit different desert environment. This project is not yet operational, but in construction right now and getting close. And this project, I think, represents a kind of progressive turn in the way that solar sometimes gets developed, and is certainly things that we're going to be exploring in the plan of development. In this case, the developer was able to leave quite a bit of vegetation on site and actually construct panels over and atop existing vegetation in following the contours of the land. So less blading, less civil improvements, less needs to reclaim. And while it may have been kind of difficult in the beginning to sort of figure out construction techniques in this, there's a lot of savings that they've found that they've made up at the back end. And it's actually more economical to take a lighter hand to the landscape. Of course, there's a lot of contingencies in this. It can't be like, well, this is like a one size fits all. This is a different geotechnical environment, different vegetation. So these are part of the studies that are underway right now and will inform the plan of development. And, ultimately we'll be looking at these types of techniques in NEPA. So just want to kind of point that out, a couple different perspectives. Next slide, please. Finally, the last phase that we sort of look at in a pod is the reclamation and closure phase. After the project's useful life, that may be when the grant runs out, but it may be when the power plant's technology, becomes obsolete, or it may be, when the off-taker no longer needs the power and is no longer purchasing the power, whatever it may be. When the project is done out there, the power plant would need to be decommissioned and existing facilities and equipment would need to be removed. This is on the operator's shoulders. This is their responsibility. So they would be required to reclaim the site and return the area to the condition appropriate for other public uses. This means remove the equipment, get it out of there, excavate out collector lines, dismantle the Gentai line, and then treat, restore the landscape, restore natural contours to the land, ensure functional drainage, reseed the area. Those are just some of the activities that go into that decommissioning and reclamation plan. To ensure that the operator follows through on this, BLM collects a bond. And if the operator was to go bankrupt or abandon the project, BLM would be able to activate that bond and, essentially take on contractors to do that work themselves. This is all documented in the decommissioning and reclamation plan, which is a important element of that plan of development, and that will all be available for public review with the draft EIS. So you can understand the assumptions and the requirements that we're working with to analyze. Next slide, please. Other permits and authorizations, not an exhaustive list here, but for those of you that do want to get involved in public process to the maximum extent, you can see that there are a number of other agencies likely to have decisions in this project. BLM, you know, we hold the land, we have a big decision to make kind of upfront, but there's a lot of activities that need other permits. So there's federal agencies on here, there's state agencies, including, you know, ADOT, Arizona Department of Transportation, Game and Fish, Arizona Corporation Commission is a notable one. They may have public processes too, and you may want to involve yourself in those public processes to learn what decision-making authority they have and how they might be able to address your concerns as well. There may be local decisions as well, including air quality, flood control, MCDOT, Maricopa County Transportation Department. We'll leave this in the slide in here, and by certain, you know, like I said, these are not exhaustive, but if you want to participate, you know, go and investigate these as well. Next slide, please. Just an estimated timeline here. This is like for the entire project timeline. Our NEPA analysis, we're projecting, like I said, till about January 2025. Site prep and construction may run up to 3 years after that if the project receives a favorable decision. The target for the applicant is about a 2029 commercial operations start date. So it seems kind of off in the future, but these dates kind of come up quick. And so this is their estimated timeline. Of course, we've got to get through NEPA here on BLM before we, you know, can discuss other timelines. This is really their desired area. Next slide, please. Now I'll turn it back over to David here and to talk a little bit about site conditions and issues and alternatives. Thanks.
Yeah, we'll just briefly share here. You know, Derek showed some good photos from other facilities to demonstrate kind of what goes into the site, but we wanted to share some images here so folks can see photos that were taken actually on the ground in the project area that's being considered now, just to give you a little bit of context for it. So, you know, we're early in the NEPA process now, and Derek covered the purpose and need earlier, which is the first part of it. You have to have a need, you know, something you need to respond to. And now going into the scoping stage, we're looking to identify issues. That's kind of the most important thing we're doing at this stage is reaching out to public and other agencies, as well as internal scoping. We're, you know, talking to subject matter experts within the BLM to identify potential issues that should be considered. First, we'll look at issues that are common to development projects and then focus it on the specific area and landscape and the project that we have in front of us. Preliminary issues were identified in the notice of intent. This is not an exhaustive list of everything that's out there, and it's not in great detail at this point. That'll be presented in the draft EIS. Again, the goal of scoping here is to help identify and refine these issues. So this is kind of a starting place of suggestions to the public of what we anticipate being out there and considered, and we look for your input on other things to consider, or maybe to dive in detail into some of these. Then we'll look at, once the issues have been identified, we'll look at measures to address the issues. That's another important part of NEPA, and back when Derek was talking about the alternatives development, that's how this comes in. We'll look at the issues that are identified, and we'll see if they can be reduced or avoided by a project alternative, you know, doing something different with the project. Design features and best management practices. You know, what steps can the developer take to minimize impacts in the way that they implement their project? And those will get, you know, once the decision is made on the EIS, that'll get incorporated into a final plan of development. And we anticipate there being lots of components that go into that. That will, here's just a list of some of them that are typical. And these will include any of the requirements from the record of decision that need to be implemented. It's a broad look at the resources that we, you know, broad resource topics that we consider in the EIS. Again, we invite the public to, if there's something that's not here or very specific on this, the most useful type of comments aren't going to be like, you have to consider visual resources, but maybe something that dials it in, like there's a specific concern or specific, wildlife species, like I've been seeing here in the comments. Those are really useful, and we encourage you to help us refine this list. Resource maps, I think Derek showed some of these. They are available on the project website. These are the first initial ones that we have up there to help familiarize everybody with the project. And you can, and Derek showed you how you can get to those. I'll show a couple examples here. And project layout with the other projects around it, showing the context for the energy grid there. This range resources is one of the ones, the maps that are available, the impacts for that. If you can see here on your screen, that diagonal slash area is rangeland or grazing allotments. And so you can see the overlap of the project on those, and that there'll be some balance of uses in the areas. It might be precluded in most of the project area. And that leads us back to, kind of the most important part for us here is receiving comments from the public. So we tried to share information to get you familiar with the project today. This is how you can submit comments going on that site. This is the most useful way. I know there's a lot of good discussion going on in the chats here, and we're certainly going to take a look and consider those. But to really ensure the more of the formal step of participating in NEPA, we do ask that people submit comments either online at the e-planning site, through email, or by mail to the Lower Sonoran field office. And again, we'll say that to be most useful to the BLM, the comments should be received by August 28th. Then we'll report summarizing the comments and how they'll be addressed in the NEPA document. Will be prepared and summarized and made available on the project site. I want to note again that the notice of intent published originally a 30-day comment period, or 2 weeks after this meeting. We recognize, and I see it in the comments here, that there are some delay. The early notification didn't go out right with the NOI. And I think that's part of the rationale for Tyler, the field manager, extending this comment period already, the scoping period, to August 28th. That's 30 days from today's meeting to give people additional time. And further information, we share this early, the planning site here, or you can contact Matt, the project manager, the information below. And this is where we typically opened up a Q&A session after the last one. After the last presentation, we are coming up close on 6. Derek, how would you like to run this portion of the meeting?
I think we have a small enough group here that we could actually have people come off and just verbally chat. I think when we have like 25, 30 people, that gets a little bit unwieldy, but I think we have, we're down in the single digits of folks who have stuck with us. So if somebody wants to throw their hand up, we can bring you off mute and you can ask a question if it hasn't been addressed yet. Does that sound good to you, David?
Yep.
All right. We're going into the wild card round here. All right, Ed's got his hand up. I will see if I can bring him off mute here. Let's see. Can we allow that? Somebody unmute Ed, please.
I'm working on Ed. Have you unmuted? I think you are allowed.
He's restricted.
Yeah, my
All
option
right,
to.
Ed, I just made you a presenter, Ed, so you should be
there
able
you
to
go.
take yourself off mute. Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Derek, and I appreciate I tried to put a few things in the comment section for you guys, and we'll reiterate those in the comment letter that we send later. And I appreciate Derek reaching out to Judy and I a couple months ago actually about this. So it's not that we've been totally kept in the dark, but just want to make sure that we are on the affected parties list. And so my question, I think I've got several of them relative to how any solar development in Arizona is affected by the 2012 solar programmatic EIS. Was Arizona included in that? Do you have variance lands and solar development zones and all that kind of stuff? And if so, how does this particular project fit into that programmatic?
Yeah, I
project?
can take this on. So we have both, and this project includes both. So this project is based around the Gillespie Solar Energy Zone, which was designated in the programmatic, the 2012 Western Solar Plan. So the company applied for that. We had a competitive auction for that. There were no bidders, and the company picked that up and put it under application shortly after that auction. And then the remaining lands, so that's roughly 2,000 acres. The remaining lands were put under application under a project at that time called Vulcan 2, because of the solar energy zone was sort of a separate designation. We took Vulcan 2 through the solar variance process, sent that report up to the director's office, and the director granted concurrence last year saying, BLM can continue processing that application into NEPA. And so that is what's combined this project. We have RDEP, which is another programmatic here, the Restoration Design Energy Project. And that did not add any designations besides an additional solar energy zone down in Yuma. It did not further kind of refine designations other than sort of a new solar energy zone designation and then kind of classifying some of our variance lands as REDAs, or renewable energy development areas, kind of preferred areas, if you will. None of those REDAs are in the vicinity of this application. They're kind of dispersed all around the state, and they were based, on an exercise to kind of look for low resource impacts. So those are not implicated in this. One thing RDEP didn't do was sort of put any kind of development cap on solar. So we have a whole lot of applications, and we just understand them case by case. And with each application that comes in and each NEPA analysis, we'll take a look at the development of past, present, and future development scenarios, and how that may impact PLM's decision.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And I know a few months ago, we actually commented on what's going to be the updated version of the 2012 document. And I'm just curious how this tracks with that other BLM planning effort that covers, many Western states.
Yeah, it doesn't really, other than, it just sort of conforming with the plan and the designations. That's just kind of where it sits.
Yeah, the timing will be interesting. I don't know how quickly that other plan will be developed, but if it is developed before this one is, there's the question of how any kind of new policies or new
Right.
things that come out of the other plan will affect this. So.
Yeah, I can tell you, based on what we're seeing, and I know we don't have, I hesitate to sort of talk about things, because we've had, admin discussions and project planning and stuff like that. So we sort of foresee from scoping of that solar PEIS and, some of the issues that were raised, what might come out in a draft EIS on that. Being totally honest with you, I haven't seen a draft EIS on it, but from the issues that were brought up, we don't think that anything is going to affect the designations in Arizona. The status quo, if you will, in Arizona is very likely to remain, although there may be, some moderate changes on things that we've seen come up with proposals about slope or setbacks from populated areas. Some of the issues that come up. Most of Arizona's projects are in pretty remote areas, pretty flat areas that wouldn't be modified by, a slope contingency. We always have great sun here. So I don't want to be like pre-decisional or anything because I don't have any more information than you do in a lot of respects, but I don't think that this project would be affected by some decisions forthcoming, but we'll just have to wait and see.
All right, thank you. That's all I have right now.
All right, if anybody else would like to throw their hand up, they are welcome to. All right, Judy, I'm going to bring you off mute here. Judy, you can unmute yourself and give you the floor.
I was going to say, how do I unmute myself? Because I'm not familiar with Microsoft Teams, but I think I found it. Was I successful?
Yes, success.
Oh, good, good. Okay. So you said something. First of all, I want to thank you for having this public meeting. It's been very informative. I just wish the maps were a little larger to see, because it ends up only taking up like a third of my screen, unfortunately. But anyway, you said something that I found quite interesting, and maybe this is because it's not in a designated solar energy development zone, which would have been done under the 2012 programmatic EIS. You said that at least I think from the map that was shown, some of the areas where this proposed solar project is going are currently part of a grazing allotment, and I'm assuming it's cattle, not sheep. And so I'm wondering if in the amendment to the RMP, since approximately, 7,000 acres maybe of the allotment might go away, if you're going to be readdressing that grazing permit, because there's going to be, it looks like somewhat of a loss of grazing or forage available to that particular operator and livestock. And I would hate for him to cram his cattle into a smaller area to, anyway, that's the question.
Yeah, so
Derek, do you want me to take this?
Go for it, Chris. Chris is our
Yeah,
range
so-
specialist, and he can take this.
Yeah, I'm the range specialist, and I've been working with the permittees, and so their numbers will need to be adjusted down from what they currently are. This project spans 4 different allotments, and 2 of those are ephemeral allotments, so they don't have any guaranteed AUMs tied to them. Though they only get grazed when there's enough rain to really provide annual forage for that. The other 2 allotments are perennial allotments, and like one of them is got 1,476 AUMs for the year, so that'll be reduced based on the reduction in forage. So they are going to be losing that ability to graze, and we're not ignoring the fact that that might pressure more cattle in a different area. We're going to be removing some cattle from that. As part of the process, they were issued per grazing regulations a 2-year notice that this might be coming down in the near future, to be able to start making plans for how to compensate for that.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure that gets addressed in some way in the draft EIS and the RMP amendment, that's all.
Mm-hmm.
So you've answered my question. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Chris.
I'll just add also your comment on the maps. Yeah, we recognize that's a lot of information. It's a really big area, so it's hard to share in this forum, but they are available on the project website. You can download every map we showed, and in addition to some other ones.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, we are kind of running against our allotted time here, but I don't want to cut anybody off if you've got another question. So we'll kind of do another round here. If you got something on your mind, please put your hand up and we'll get to you. We'll give it another minute or two, and if we're not seeing a hand, we might call it here. All right, thanks, Ed.
Just a quick note, if I may, to Ed and Judy. I did send an email to eac@deserttortoise.org to confirm your mailing address, just to make sure that we have the most current address for you.
And we did see you provide some in the chat here. You know, certainly you'll be submitting a comment. Anybody that comments on the project or any of the, you know, submits a scoping comment will be automatically added to our distribution list, just in case you weren't.
All right, well, not hearing any more comments. I want to thank everybody for their attendance and participation. I'll give it over to David to kind of close things out here, and we will be anxiously awaiting comments for the next month. So thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And thank you, Chris and Derek, for responding to those questions. I want to end here with the how to submit comments. It is the most important part of this process for us. I encourage you, you know, we're going to look at this chat, but I strongly encourage you to submit through one of these methods. And then we'll be able to track it through all of our reporting and into the DEIS. There's definitely some good conversations going on there. So once again, I'm just going to reiterate, you can submit your comments online at the project site. There's a, I think it's called Participate Now, or link to the left where you can click and submit your comments electronically, by email to this address here, or by mail to the Lower Sonoran field office. And we would appreciate it if these could be received or at least postmarked if you're mailing it by August 28th to make it the most useful. Obviously, please, you know, BLM welcomes your comments at any time, but we would appreciate it by August 28th to formally submit comments during the scoping period. With that, I have nothing else in my presentation. Derek, are you,
Nothing else from me. We will have this recorded and available on e-planning in the next few days. So if you want to go back to the first part, you can see that. Other than that, stay tuned, and we will be in touch with more information as it comes together.
Thank you, everybody.